Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Bull. So in this episode, we have a case that hits pretty close to home with tact because Marissa's husband, Greg, is being arrested because there was a fire at the restaurant and he's being charged with involuntary manslaughter, which he could face up to 15 years for. So what this ends up turning into a whole situation of trying to figure out, understanding, what went wrong. Basically, there was a lot of grease in the, ducts, the vents weren't properly handled, the cleaning supplies weren't really put away in a very reasonable manner. Obviously, Greg wants to do more for the family of the victim who died in the fire, but it's no, if you do that, the prosecutors could use that as being him doing that is because he's trying to ease his guilty conscience, meaning that he knows that he's guilty in this regard. So there's that. It's also interesting, too, because this is, one of the only instances you ever see Marissa in court personally. I mean, obviously, it's a very poor... She ends up saying it, that basically this comes down to, her two babies, the two important things in her life, that being Tack and her husband, are kind of on the line in this case because... I guess it's because Tack, reputation, I guess, would kind of... I guess because if things kind of go sour, she'd be the reason why things kind of got sour, so that would kind of affect that, I guess, would be her reasoning for it. I'm not 100% sure. But nevertheless. So there is reasonable other assumptions, because the whole thing that Bull's trying to create in this is that basically just because certain events have lined up to say this plus this plus this will equal ultimately there being a fire, just because these events happened in the past, and even if they are still currently true, it does not mean that this fire happened. Basically saying that there could have been other stuff that kind of played a role in it, because it's hey, even the fire inspector was kind of hey, at the very least, maybe something came in there to actually start the fire, so there was some other contributing factor, the victim actually smoked, and that could have played a factor in why the fire got started in the first place. But obviously the prosecutor kind of shifted that around to be yeah, would that have even been an issue if it wasn't for all those other things happening in the first place? Because there was no other, there's no accelerant or anything like that. So obviously, this is the main reason why anything caught on fire to burn down the restaurant in the first place. The situation gets even more complicated because of Marissa, because obviously she's neck deep in this, and because for her, and it's something it didn't even cross my mind to think. When she's looking at this situation with Greg, she's kind of comparing it to Kyle, because she finds out that Greg is owes $2 million to his investors, and he has a short amount of time to pay it. And it's this could have been part of some insurance policy to pay all his debts. But even Bull was trying to give Greg the benefit of the doubt. It's hey, he's not Kyle. Obviously, you're basing this on kind of your experience with Kyle. At the very least, ask him, talk to him, which I'm assuming she didn't really do, because it never came up for her to be I actually talked to him about it. I think because for her, it's it's kind of interesting because Bull kind of talks about this later on, because he starts talking about the fact is that Marissa kind of starts thinking okay, maybe Greg did set this fire because he had a fire insurance policy and stuff like that. And so it turns into that situation of Bull put it in a very interesting way of you're trying to hurt yourself first, in a sense of you're trying to immediately cut yourself deep so that you kind of bleed, and when this person ultimately is proven bad, everything was wrong, that when it comes back to hurt you, it doesn't hurt as much, that you're not bleeding, because it's kind of tearing yourself down a little bit ahead of time just so no one else, someone else can't do it, essentially. I know I'm not phrasing that right, but it was kind of sad and heartbreaking, just because Marissa, a combination of just who she is and just her experiences. When you look at Marissa's whole life, it's just kind of yeah, you can kind of tell Marissa probably has a little bit, definitely has issues when it comes to trusting people, especially after the last relationship she was in with Kyle, that whole scam situation. So there's that. I think, you can make the argument her whole situation of being adopted, probably that kind of being, maybe on some level that kind of plays a part in it. And that's something Bull, wanted to try and reassure her about everything, trying to be at the end of the day, because, she felt bad because she's I'm questioning him. I can't just simply believe him. I should be able to trust him. What kind of person does that make me? And you have Bull being you're asking the Helen Keller of marriage tell you what color the dress you're in. The color of the dress you're in. And I thought it was kind of interesting because it's like, you're talking about a man who has a failed marriage himself. You're really asking me, to talk about that, because it's like, because for her, she blames herself because it's like, I should trust my husband. I should believe him. He's my husband. I want to believe him. But there's part of her that, wants to believe that it's an accident, but there's still that part of her that just has to know whether or not there's more to it than that. And she blames herself for that. But boy, at the end of the day, it's kind of like, you are who you are. You can only do what you can do, and you can only be who you can be. And so, like, these are aspects about yourself, and you can't do too much more than that. Like, obviously you can work on it, but for right now, it's just kind of like, this is how you are. So she even goes to the part of like, Bull ends up obviously talking to Greg, because Chunk was initially going to do the whole like court prep, and she actually listens in, even though I was kind of like, oh, that's going to be bad. So I knew some stuff was going to come up that she probably shouldn't or doesn't need to hear, but it's just, like, it probably makes her cry, like, hearing all that stuff from Greg, but at the same time, it's like, she couldn't just trust to know that's how he felt. She had to go through the trouble of listening in on a conversation like this, just because there's that part of her that just kind of has that hard part of trust, because that's even what happens with the whole kissing situation that she brought up. It's like, that one night the fire happened, Greg didn't wake me up and kiss me, because that's their thing. Every night that we've been, since we got back together, no matter who it is, like when we get home late and the other person's asleep, we wake them up, kiss them, and tell them we love them. And she ends up telling Bull that, and that kind of gets, brought up against him. And so ultimately what they end up finding out is that the one that was behind all this was Chef Hansen, because Hansen was, because he was made partner like 6 years after the restaurant started, he kind of it was basically in the position of an investor. And when this fire happened, the insurance policy makes it so that Greg wouldn't have seen any of this money. He couldn't benefit from it, because the contract says all the money has to be going towards paying to make the restaurant, plus making sure that all the investors get back what they put into the company. So that meant Hansen would have been able to get his money back that he put in and start his own restaurant, hence why he started the fire and all that. So that's that complicated situation. And you saw this at the end. I thought was kind of interesting. Marissa comes up, she hugs Greg, and she hugs Bull. She's grateful, but you also see Greg kind of being a little down, and it's like, okay, why is that? And he talks about it later on. It's because Marissa told Bull about our kissing thing. The fact of the matter is, you did. It's just proof that you actually had doubts. Meaning there's some part of you that was thinking like, oh, I didn't kiss you because I was offsetting that fire. Because that's the sad thing. When it came to Greg, for Greg, he's like, I've messed up a lot. There's a lot I have to redeem myself for. When it comes to Marissa, like, I failed when it came to our first marriage. He's like, it fell on me. The reason why things kind of fell apart. She was away, and the fact of the matter is, he was sad and just kind of wallowed in his own sadness. And it's like, that's not the place you want to be. But he's like, the fact is, Marissa came back in my life. It's like the closest I'll come to a miracle I'll probably ever get in my life. But for him, it's like that kissing every night thing. Like, he's like, okay, she's sound asleep. Hey, the fact of the matter is, we've done this every night. It's proof that I love you. And I think that's also like a representation of like, hey, she trusts me, that it's like, oh, it's all good. But the fact of the matter is, it just, it has to hurt on some level, because it's like, I thought we were good. It's like, she knows I love her, that everything's great, everything's good. But then it just hurts him, because it makes him feel like you're not beside me. You don't have my back. You don't trust me, even after everything. And even Marissa said, she kind of quoted what Bull said, but she was like, I hope that you give me a chance, to be back, to kind of learn to kind of trust, and not just kind of be, almost cynical to the point that she is, And I just thought that was all kind of very interesting in the long run. Which Greg, kisses her, and she's like, what's that for? And he's like, to let you know I'm home. And it's like, oh, it's like, because I'm so glad it worked out like that, because it easily could have gone the other way, or just kind of like, because I thought it was kind of interesting too, because like Danny was the one that was kind of like, oh, we need to tell them. And it's like, Bull was like, no, we're not going to. Because that's ultimately like, it kind of plays into that. Like, the only thing Greg really brought up was the kissing thing, but I'm sure he thinks like everything else connected to what Bull was asking. It didn't go to the degree that like, it still came out nonetheless. What the whole point I'm trying to make is, the fact is that Bull brought up like some stuff that, like, fact is, Marissa even brought that up, would mean that she has doubts about, and questions about whether or not I set the fire. So part of me was wondering, like, I expected him to kind of pull a lot different aspects from the conversation. It didn't correlate in my head to think like, oh, he's pulling the fact is that Bull brought up the kissing thing as kind of like Marissa kind of like set you up with that. So it didn't solidify, like it brought up, her doubts, but it didn't, Bull never expressed it was like, oh yeah, like Marissa had doubts here and there. Like he never brought that up because that was the whole point, because he wanted to make sure it's like, we know there's an arson after the arson investigator looked into it for them. It's like, we know it was arson. There was a fire starter, but we don't know who did it. Like, obviously, if we tell Marissa's going to just think the worst. She's going to, like I said, kind of like prepare herself ahead of time, like she was already doing, and she's going to think Greg did it, and that'll send her down a spiral. It's just going to cause more issues in a relationship. And it's like, before we send Marissa down that route, because once that bell's rung, it can't be unrung. So Bull doesn't want to do that. I think it's just because it's like Marissa is happy, and I think he's doing whatever he can to make sure she stays happy because she deserves to be happy, And I think that's his main driving force. Because even at the beginning of all this, it's like Benny and Bull, honestly, neither one of them really knew what to take of this case, because it's like their gut was kind of like, honestly, we don't know where we sit on this. But at the end of the day, for them, it's like the main important thing, whether he did it or not, the more important thing was the fact is that this was for Marissa, not necessarily for him, which it was for him, but mainly because it was a byproduct of because it being so important to Marissa. So. But like I said, luckily everything ended pretty well. So I'm glad to see that things are kind of working out in that regard. So we can definitely continue to see Marissa and Greg, because things could have easily gone down the other route, especially the way that was kind of heading. I was like, oh man, it's like, that sucks. And it just, I would wonder also what that would mean going forward with Marissa and Bull, which she kind of, I don't know if she would necessarily blame him, because he went out of his way to make sure that she didn't know about the other stuff or the arson investigation. Like, that was her first time finding out about it. So I figured that would kind of cause some complications ahead of time in itself. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what this could all mean going forward for Marissa. The whole, like, her wanting kind of to change and kind of learn to kind of, I think, like, let her guard down a little bit more to make sure everything's better. But the fact is they're working on it together, such an interesting thing. And I'm curious to see where this kind of all goes in the end. So I'm very interested to see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.